Interest in passenger rail service in Kansas appears to be growing. Is the state ready to make the investment? Plus, the fight over abortion turns to the state constitution and worries thousands of layoffs in Wichita could increase the state's problems with brain drain. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. This week, Spirit Aerosystems began handing out thousands of layoff notices as the work stoppage on Boeing's grounded 737 MAX jet leaves workers with nothing to do. The big fear many have is that this could drive some of the state's most skilled labor away permanently.
It's not good. It's pretty horrible. It's pretty sad that we're even dealing with this at all.
The president of the Machinists Union says his members are putting the blame for the 2,800 layoffs now underway on Boeing.
There's plenty of anger here to pass around. So, I think that old saying, management doesn't care about us, that's the feeling that they have.
The union is thankful for all the work the city and state have done to streamline the aid process for those losing their jobs, but says the bigger concern is just how long these layoffs will last.
I still believe that Spirit's main issue with this is not getting our experienced help back. So that's always a major concern because everybody's looking for experienced help in the aerospace industry.
And I think that's a legitimate fear because we've seen it before.
Jerry Siebenmark has been covering aviation in Wichita for more than 2 decades. He says the longer the 737 MAX remains grounded and out of production, the more likely workers are to leave Wichita.
I would say right now it seems like the opportunities are outside of Kansas for aerospace workers.
I do know that there are some aggressive campaigns from out of state to try to take in some, which is Wichita's best assets, and that's our human capital. That's the people who work for us. Our goal is to keep what makes Wichita amazing here.
And joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Susan Humphreys, a Republican from Wichita, and State Representative Pankawee Victors, a Democrat from Wichita. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So this is obviously something that the governor's office, the Department of Labor, the mayor's office, they've been talking about for quite some time. I know lawmakers have been paying attention. Is there anything new from the state end as far as what's going on with the layoffs with Spirit?
It's devastating news what's happening, and but the good news is that our governor, the birthday girl today, she has been in contact with our agencies like the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, and the Department of Children and Families, and they're all working together to work out some kind of plan. And that's all we've been hearing. Well, I've been hearing all week is they're ready to move on this issue.
Mm-hmm. I would agree that it's been really encouraging. I would say the way that different organizations and people have come together to say we need to take care of this. We don't want to hear that news that people want to move outside the state. It's so important to keep people in the state. And we have a South Central delegation meeting. It's bipartisan. And on Wednesday, we had the Workforce Alliance come. They gave us some good resources we can pass on to our constituents. There's a website that's
ready to go.
Yeah. It's aircapitaloftheworld.com, and it's got lots of good resources and people can click on. So I'd say it's definitely being talked about, and people are trying to work together to solve the problem.
Yes.
And as we move forward, how long before this gets to be something even more serious? I mean, when I was talking to folks yesterday and I was looking at all of the different Facebook posts and people saying, yeah, I got a notice today, et cetera, a lot of them were saying, I knew this was coming. I was already looking. I've got something lined up. Friends have told me, yeah, I've got neighbors that are moving out. They're headed out of state already. I know there's a lot of talk of we can't hold out very long, but it seems like the pull is already happening.
I would say that that's true, and I think we knew it was coming, and I'll just tell a personal story. Our son, who worked in the industry, lost his job, but he found out the very end of December, and so he was a little bit ahead of that 2,800 announcement that came out, and so he's already found something else in a similar sort of situation. So I would just say, we've done this before in Wichita, right? There's highs and lows. We know how to help, and I hope people will just stick together, use the resources,
that
and
are available.
be able to stay and wait it out, because it's going to get better. We know that.
Yeah, and like I said, our Secretary of Labor, Daya Garcia, Wichita native, who's aware of this issue, grew up, here in the North End. She knows the ins and outs, and they have a plan. They're ready to go. And any questions that we threw at them on Wednesday, they had to answer, and they have a great team. So I would encourage those that are dealing with that, and not just the Department of Labor, but also other organizations like you talked about, like the Goodwill. There's credit unions that are willing to help too, to help people keep their homes. Yeah. And so the resources are there. We just have to make sure that the people get to those right resources.
And the last thing I want to talk about is, when I spoke with the folks in the union, they said our workers are blaming Boeing for all of this. And the solution is to get the MAX jet back in the air. Is there anything that Kansas as a state can do to influence that process, or are we pretty much at the mercy of what happens in Seattle?
I can't see that. I mean, we need to let them know how important it is, but wow, that's a question that's kind of above my influence, I would say.
I just like to say I'm ready to work. I'm ready to help, whatever they have in mind, or I'm hoping that they're all sitting at the table like us today, and they're trying to find out a solution. And I'm here, I'm ready, I'm available. I love Wichita, and I want to encourage, employment here. And so I'm ready to work, but I think this should be a bipartisan issue.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think it has been, really, from everybody I've spoken with.
Yes, it seems like it,
Yeah. All right. Well, some other things happening at the State House this week that really made some pretty big headlines. Lawmakers are acting fast on one of the biggest issues of this legislative session, like abortion and Medicaid expansion. First, we take a look at the opening debate over Medicaid expansion with KSN's Alec Gartner.
It's only day 8 of the legislative session, and a Senate committee is already debating what's sure to be one of the hottest topics. Lawmakers went all of last year without having a formal debate on a Medicaid expansion bill. Now the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee began hearing from those in favor of the newest plan. It's a compromise between Governor Laura Kelly and Senate Majority Leader Jim Denning. It could cover up to 150,000 Kansans that can't afford health care. AARP of Kansas says many of their members would benefit from expansion. The group says there's a segment of the population older than 50 and too young to get Medicare that is struggling to find coverage.
We hear it constantly. Even something like an emergency call to the emergency room is unaffordable for many of these people who are either not employed or employed in a part-time job or a low-paying job that doesn't offer benefits.
Friday will be another day that lawmakers hear from those in favor of the bill. Opponents will get their chance to testify next week to tell lawmakers why they believe expansion shouldn't happen. If the bill is passed out of committee next week, it would head to the Senate and then over to the House. Reporting at the Capitol, I'm Alec Gartner.
And this is obviously kind of the reverse direction of what we saw last year as it's moving from the House to the Senate, presumably. This is a bill that was a compromise between some Republicans and the Democrats. They seemed pretty confident they had the votes moving forward. With these hearings going on, is that changing? Are we seeing a shift in allegiances at all? Are you hearing about people rethinking their choices?
I've heard a little bit about it, and I'll be honest, some of the people that are thinking about their support initially, when they found out that there was not an exception and that Medicaid expansion would be paying for abortions, it has made them think twice about it. So it delves into that topic that we're probably going to get to in a minute with the constitutional amendment, but that's making people think twice. And then when I hear compromise, I think it's it's hard to see how it was a compromise. From my side of it, it doesn't have a lot of the things in it that Republicans would want to see in it. So I don't, it was bipartisan because certainly there were people on both sides that sponsored it. But as far as the final product, we'll just have to see, you know, after it goes through the committee process, what it looks like.
Yeah. I know there's certainly a lot of optimism after the governor and Senator Denning made that announcement.
Well, first of all, I'd like to applaud them for even getting to that point, because a lot of times when it comes to big issues like this, you don't see a lot of bipartisan agreements happening. So for them to even get to this point and be ready to go, like this is January, things are usually moving slow right now, but to just bam, to put it on the table, I think that's awesome. And I really can't speak for the Senate, and I won't know until it comes, you know, to our side, and then we start hearing more things. And like I always said, you know, with the hearings going on the Senate side, you know, people are educating me because I can't always keep up with what's going on in the Senate side because we're so busy on the House side. But I'm hoping that we can have something that we can all support, or majority can support.
Well, and talk to me, I want to hear from both of you on this, but talk to me a little bit about the importance of hearing what your constituents have to say on all of this and letting them know what's in the bill, where it stands, how it would affect them.
Okay, well, my constituents have personally made it clear, and even from our forum that we had here earlier in January downtown, they have all expressed that something needs to happen to put our differences and views of how we feel, you know, about certain subjects aside, and let's do something. We're suffering here. This could help over 150,000 people, and it could help people get under the umbrella of this, of getting health care, affordable health care. Yes, they have come to me and they said, do something. We don't care, you know, about if it has everything that we want, but we need something. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is to hear everybody's side. But also I'm glad that it is in the Senate, so I can do my coffees and talk to my people in my district and email them back and forth about what's in this bill.
And I would say that I'm also getting emails about it, but I think the interesting thing is when people actually find out what does it mean, when they are informed about Medicaid expansion, that it's people between 19 and 64 that usually, well, they are able-bodied because they're not on Medicaid already. They are between 100 and 134% of the poverty level. Some of them have jobs. I'm concerned that there's people that are trying to get services through Medicaid now and are on waiting lists, and if we add 150,000 more, I'm concerned that they won't be able to get their services. So back to the constituents, when they find out what's really in it, what it might cost the state of Kansas, it does make people pause and think, are there other creative solutions? Are there other things we can do to make sure that people get the health care that they need and the health insurance that they need? It's two separate things. And you know, I love the like Grace Med, Guadalupe Clinic, Hunter Health Clinic. They're doing wonderful things, and those are options that we need to work on also, I think, because we may have a more creative solution.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, one of the issues involved is paying for abortion services, and abortion, a big topic at the State House this week and probably through the next month, one way or another. A proposed constitutional amendment on abortion is heading to the House and Senate floors for lawmakers to debate likely next week. This after they heard a full day of testimony from both those who want the amendment and those who fear it. Those in this standing room only crowd all wanted to talk about one thing on Tuesday: abortion in the Kansas Constitution. But that's about all they agreed on.
To call abortion a right is to have an injustice to women. To date, I've met no one that brags about their choice.
It's an old argument in Kansas that a state Supreme Court ruling last summer resurrected. The ruling determined the state constitution guarantees the right to an abortion. Abortion foes say this ruling prevents even regulation of abortion for health and medical safety. They want to fix that with a constitutional amendment. They say it would protect things like parental consent of minors wanting an abortion and the ban on Medicaid payments for the procedure.
I would hope that people would keep an open mind, look at all of the facts of the amendment, but I do think people have a propensity for where they stand on this issue.
While many objections to the amendment were couched in terms of women's right to choose, some objected mostly to the timing. As proposed, the amendment would go on the August primary ballot. They point to the last time Kansans voted on a constitutional amendment in August, back in 1986.
The data shows that the turnout for the August elections was about 40% of what the November election was. So basically 60% of Kansans were disenfranchised.
Others are more concerned about the impact the abortion fight will have on Senate and House races later in the year.
Well, I watched during the marriage amendment, and I watched the election dates, August primary and November elections, become a political football. I think it was relevant that the legislature changed the date to April back then.
And of course, there were also a lot of questions about legal minutiae involved with exactly what this would mean, how it could be interpreted or misinterpreted, what else it could impact besides just abortion. This is a huge issue. And while there are definitely some very diametrically opposed sides on this, most studies have shown that the majority of people are somewhere in the middle. How is that playing out as the discussion of this amendment moves forward at the State House? I know you're on the committee, Susan, so I'm going to start with you.
Okay, yeah, it was a grueling day of listening to lots of testimony, but listening to it, what I realized was that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think most people are in the middle, and they need to keep an open mind and understand what it is that we're trying to do. And people feel very passionate about it. Also, that's why we're not changing something in the legislature. We're putting it on the ballot so that Kansans can vote. And because Kansans are passionate about this issue, I think they should be allowed to vote on this issue. So that's one point. And then the other point is I'm concerned that people don't understand what we're trying to do. It's not a ban on abortion. It simply is taking us back to where we were in March of 2019 before the Supreme Court ruling discovered a right to abortion in the Kansas Constitution. So if you could get an abortion before that, it's just like we're just going back to that. You could. But it is keeping some of those regulations we had in place, like informed consent before a medical procedure. We have an informed consent in every medical procedure. Parental consent, 24-hour notice, licensing for abortion facilities. Those are all things we need to keep in place. And the way the legal minutia is right now with the decision that the Supreme Court found, those regulations are all in peril right now. And I don't really think anyone in that middle wants unregulated abortion. I think they want it to be safe, and we do too, and that's why it's important that we pass the amendment.
Unfortunately, I don't sit on the House Federal and State Affairs, but from what I'm hearing is I think why the majority is in the middle is because they're probably confused just as I'm confused about why the process is moving so fast. I haven't even got a full grasp of actually the process of what's going on and where it's at, and if it's out of committee, it passed your committee right away. A lot of my constituents I didn't have time to even let them know that they could testify in support or not support of it. So, I wasn't even aware of that process either. Also, I feel like the Constitution, when I just glanced over it real quick between my meetings, it's very misleading, and so I'm not sure, it's not very clear and to the point of what it's trying to do. And I feel like it leaves a lot of things out, such as if the woman's health is in jeopardy, or as far as molestation or incest or rape, things like that. This is a very big issue, and I think all of those things should be included and in the amendment, because it's not like we're going to have a lot of time to come back and fix it. And the majority of the time when I see abortion things go through, it's not everybody, hey, let's all jump on the same, we all feel the same way about it. It's a very touchy subject, and so if we're going to pass something, let's do it right, and let's all have the wording right and everything, so we don't confuse our constituents if it goes on the ballot.
All right. Well, I have a feeling we're going to see a pretty big debate on it, if not next week, then the week after, because my understanding is they're going to push it to the floor pretty quickly. All right, we've got a couple of other things to talk about. A discussion on bringing more passenger rail service to Kansas certainly drew a crowd at the State House this week. KSN's Alec Gartner explains.
Nearly 100 people came to the Capitol to meet with lawmakers and stress that Kansas needs to invest in passenger rail. Sedgwick Senator Carolyn McGinn says this is the third time she has hosted the meeting, and it has gotten bigger every year. She says more people are wanting to travel by train.
People nowadays want to be working on their computers. They want to be doing their business while they're traveling, and so this gives them an opportunity to do that.
The meeting included people from all over the state, and even other states like New Mexico and Oklahoma. An Amtrak official talked about the train industry in Kansas, and how a priority for it is getting Wichita passenger rail. Currently, the closest stop is 20 miles away in Newton. Officials want to connect two big cities in Wichita and Oklahoma City, and that's an idea that has cities that would be along the route getting excited.
When people get off the train, they have a couple of $100s in their pocket, they spend that money in those communities.
It would make a huge difference, and of course it would mean passenger rail actually stopping instead of just freight.
Supporters hope the State Department of Transportation's next 10-year plan will have a greater focus on trains. Reporting in Topeka, I'm Alec Gartner.
And certainly we've heard a lot about that 10-year transportation plan. I've got to say, me personally, I love the idea of being able to get on a train in Mays and ride it into West Wichita so that I don't have to drive. Now somehow I don't see that being included in this, but that's what I'm hearing as I hear that. And who knows, you get one step in, who knows what the next step could be. But certainly, I know every time this issue comes up in the Wichita area, at least, it's really a lot of people pay attention.
Yeah, I think it's, you want to go first?
I didn't get to make the meeting, but I have made the meetings in the past. But I'm happy to see that Oklahoma came up for the meeting and they're in on this discussion. I actually have family in Oklahoma, so I personally would use the rail system because yes, we're always on our computers, we're always answering emails or whatever. And so I think this would be a benefit for Wichita. And so I would like to see something happen on this.
Yeah. Well, it'd certainly make a day trip to Oklahoma City a lot easier.
Yeah. I think it seems super interesting too. And I know that Amtrak is on board and they want to help, and BNSF also want, it's their, the track, I think, is owned by them. So it's it's going to have to be a cooperative effort. Where will the funding come from? State, I think there's a chance that there might be some federal funds and of course local. I mean, we have to weigh the benefits and the cost. It seems really like a great idea, because once we get to Oklahoma City, then there's a train that goes on to Fort Worth. From Newton now it goes on to Kansas City. I mean, it just opens everything up. I think it seems interesting. Just are going to have to weigh what's it going to look like and how is it going to work.
Well, and it's interesting too, because it seems to come up periodically as an issue. But at this point it's coming up as we're looking at the next 10-year transportation plan, and perhaps that kind of changes the dynamics.
Possibly. I know the new secretary is working hard on that 10-year plan to get that figured out.
I would like to see something, and I'm pretty sure we can all be, this is another place we can be bipartisan on, and I look for those opportunities, and I'm ready, let us know what we have to do or when we can get the discussion going with hearings or whatever they need support. I'm ready to have that discussion.
All right. Yeah. Well, we've got one more discussion here to be looking at. Last weekend, folks from Abilene to Dodge City felt the ground shaking as a quake centered near South Hutchinson rocked the state. The 4.5 earthquake renewed questions about what the state can and should do to prevent future shaking. Scenes like this surprised folks across Cakeland Sunday afternoon.
All my stuff was just rattling and shaking, and the stuff on the walls.
Linda Cooley and her husband Fred were getting ready to watch the Chiefs game when suddenly their home started shimmying and shaking from floor to ceiling.
It just went forward and then back, and that was it. But it was really a lot bigger than we never had before.
It felt like maybe a semi ran into it or something, and I really thought the roof was caving in.
They heard what they described as a pop or bang as the shaking started. Similar to what you can hear in this surveillance video provided to Cake News by a Hutchinson business owner. Many, like the Coolies, say they feel like this is part of a growing trend.
I just wonder what the future holds for Hutchinson, whether they're going to get worse or get better.
Last summer, the Kansas Corporation Commission started to look into the effect wastewater injection wells are having on earthquakes in the area. Last week, the KCC's seismologist reported back to state lawmakers, telling them there's now general agreement injection wells are the cause of the quakes, but there's disagreement as to which wells are the problem, those in the Hutchinson area itself, or is this a shockwave effect coming from wells down in Harper County? The Coolies just hope they figure it out soon and bring the quakes to a halt.
I don't want to go through that again. It's just really a scary event.
Now, one thing that the KCC seismologist also emphasized in this is that this is not a tectonic plate earthquake, so we're not likely to see those 6, 7, 8 earthquakes on the Richter scale that cause catastrophic damage, major deaths, homes destroyed, that sort of stuff. But that doesn't change how scary it is for the folks who are going through these, especially when they're right near the epicenter.
Totally. Yeah. We actually lived in Tokyo 2 different times, and we know what that feels like. To all of a sudden, everything starts shaking, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was scary. I mean, I felt it here in Wichita, and it was scary because, you're not supposed to be feeling that in Wichita, Kansas. Tornadoes, yes, but not earthquakes. One of the things, I've sat on the Water and Environment Committee, and one of the bills that I brought up was the limitation of the injection wells, of how much they can pump, and that actually was a good conversation because I did have people in constituents and people all over Kansas was like, look, something needs to be done. At that time, KCC was like, it's kind of Oklahoma's fault, and Oklahoma's kind of blaming Kansas. And I know we have these different studies going on, but something needs to happen because this needs to quit. We shouldn't be feeling this in Wichita. And I can't imagine. I didn't know the other surrounding areas were badly affected too. So yeah, I mean, we need to hold the right people accountable for what's going on, whether it's Oklahoma or whether it's right here in Kansas.
All right, and I'm going to let Punkawee have the last word there because we are out of time. Okay. Susan Punkawee, thank you so much for joining me. I've enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. For now, have a great week.